us a little bit about the sort of mindsets of these women. So, the 20s and 30s, we have women who imagine themselves as moving into independence in one way or the other. Now, not talking about autonomy, but at least some capacity to support themselves. And World War II confirms that, but now in the 1950s, that's gone. As that disappears, does their sense of themselves as women, as sexual beings, does that also change?
Well, one thing we need to keep in mind about this entire post-war era for a good 20 years after the end of World War II is that this was a very strange time in American history, particularly in the 20th century. It was a moment that was, in a way, a throwback in a lot of ways to an earlier time, and a disruption from, especially for women's lives, from a kind of trajectory toward more independence and equality. And so you have this moment, and things are very odd. So how did women feel about it? Well, they felt all different things. Some women just embraced that domestic role and said, I'm going to make this a meaningful life for myself. And for many of them, if not for their entire adult lives, for a good part of it, they found it fulfilling. For others, it was frustration from beginning to end. A lot of times, this rosy backward look at the 1950s as the good old days masks a huge amount of discontent, especially for women, but also for men who felt the pressure to provide this kind of middle-class life. But for women, many of them were deeply unhappy. There was a huge amount of depression. There was a huge amount of alcoholism and addiction. Often when people talk about, the reliance on drugs and the problems of addiction, they erase the fact that many, many women, and it was really recognized at the time, they were addicted to tranquilizers, they were addicted to alcohol, as a way to numb their pain of feeling stuck and frustrated in this domestic role. So it was really, it really depended on the woman. But there were a lot of things about their lives that did change and that came out of the earlier decades, and especially World War II. Sexual emancipation had been in progress for most of the 20th century, and World War II gave a big boost to women's sexual autonomy and many opportunities. Women left their small towns and moved to the cities to work. There was a lot more social life. There were opportunities for heterosexual pairing. There were opportunities for both lesbians and gay men to find each other and establish relationships. And this happened in the industries, it happened in the cities, it happened in the armed services. And after World War II, this heightened attention to the heterosexual nuclear family drove a lot of this either underground or into a new kind of containment. The idea that sexual fulfillment for women could be and should be and would be realized within marriage. The new sexualization of marriage, even of motherhood. There were doctors and other experts and psychologists who talked about women's sexual fulfillment culminated with childbirth, and a focus on sexual satisfaction within marriage. Now, what was the effect of all of this pressure? There was a new attention to the stigma of unmarried sex, especially for women. That, God forbid, if a woman had sex before she was married, and it was always called premarital, with the expectation that women were going to marry, it could supposedly ruin her reputation, ruin her chances for marriage. So one thing that's happening is that the marriage age is really dropping during these years. The average age of marriage for women in the mid to late 1950s was 19, and only a year or two older than that for men. Because if you wanted to have sex with your boyfriend, girlfriend, you had to get married if it was going to be legitimate.